Hi, I'm Sandy Lowry's the Good Girl Confessional Podcast and Women Beyond 40 platform would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which this podcast is recorded, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung people and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging and acknowledge this land was never ceded. Hello and welcome back to the Good Girl Confessional Podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Lowry's, and I'm super excited to be back in my happy place in the studio here in Melbourne. And I am really excited to bring from Sydney our special guest today. Her name is Beryl Crosher-Segers, and she grew up on the Cape Flats of apartheid-era South Africa. As a little girl, she always wanted to be a writer, but she never dreamed in all of her imagination that she would one day be living here in Australia and doing exactly that. In fact, Beryl has written 3 books and is working on a 4th, and a documentary is coming out also about the first 2 books, which is super exciting. She has the most extraordinary backstory. This is a story layered in generational trauma and lived trauma, and her journey to actually writing a memoir about that started out to be a healing journey but became something entirely different, which led her then to seeking help and helping others, I think, in their journey with mental health. This is an extraordinary story from an extraordinary woman. Please welcome to the confessional, Beryl Crosher-Segers.
Hey, how about a podcast about all the music that got us hooked up, knocked up and broken up? If that got you humming a hit from the 70s and 80s, then have we got a show for you. I'm Jo Pybus, and when Sandy's not in the confessional talking to awesome chicks, she's driving a Sandman over to my place and co-hosting Alex the Seal with me and Molly, a podcast about music nostalgia. Just search for Alex the Seal on your podcast app.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional. Beryl, how are you?
I'm really well on this cold Saturday afternoon. It's very cold in Sydney, and I think we're adjusting still to winter. But It's really lovely to be here, and thank you for having me on.
Oh, it's so lovely for you to be here. And, of course, I'm down here in Melbourne and it's very cold as well. So normally it's a little bit warmer in Sydney, but I believe you're having a really cold spate as well. So.
Yeah. Yes, we are. It's been like 3 degrees, 2 degrees. So which is, really cold for us. So,
yeah.
And I think every year we forget how cold winter gets. And then it's like a shock when it does happen. So, yeah.
I think that's true. I was just saying to someone this morning, actually, that it felt like here in Melbourne anyway, that it was particularly mild. And so it felt like it just was like a light switch turned on this year and it was suddenly cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, not much of a lead up.
Yeah.
I am really excited to have you here in the studio because you have lived, honestly, an extraordinary life. Not all of it has been easy. That's an understatement.
Yeah.
You've had a bit of a harrowing life, but I wanted first of all to say congratulations to you on your new book, which is called Living with Purpose, Inspired Living. I love that, and I feel like we will get to that because I really want to talk about it. But I would love people to understand your life and what led to the latest book. So you've been busy. You've written 3 books now.
Yeah.
I guess I wanted to start with your first book, which is called A Darker Shade of Pale, and it's a memoir of apartheid South Africa, which is, of course, where you started your life.
Yes. Yeah.
And this journey. Can you maybe, for people who've not read your work, can you perhaps take us back there and how that book came about and your journey and your story?
Okay, so that book was a high school dream. I mean, not a memoir, but writing has always been a dream for me, but completely out of our reach, growing up in that society. So I was always a writer. I think I was born a writer. And I'm a Dear Diary kind of girl. So I had lots of notes, lots of stories that I recorded over the years, and that helped me a lot in writing the memoir. I'm also fortunate to have a very vivid photographic memory. So I capture a lot of things and store them. So when I decided to write the memoir, I wanted it more as a legacy for our family. I had no idea at the time that other people would read my book, that it would go out there. I wanted our future generations to know where we came from, why we're here, what brought us here, because we were like the pioneers of our family coming to Australia. And I wanted there to be some history for them to, whoever may be interested in the future. But as I wrote the book and revisited a lot of the trauma of growing up under oppression and how the struggle of my parents, the struggle of our communities, what we had to endure, it did cause me a lot of trauma. I was completely unprepared for that. In the book, I go right back to where my anxiety started as a child when my brother drowned. And he was 4 and I was 6, and very vivid memories of that. And back in those days, there was no therapy, my parents had their own grief that they coped with. Us, the children, we were just left to work things out, and no one thought about anxiety in children. So I developed anxiety around that age that I carried throughout my whole life. Mm. And also my parents were my mother was focused on education. She knew that would be our ticket out of poverty. My father was very much caught up in the revolution, but not as an active person, more in his mind and more, in telling us about it. And from a young age, he spoke to us about what was happening. I had no idea until I was a teenager that there were people living on the other side of the line, children like me, living privileged lives. I had no idea because we grew up in our own area where we didn't have to leave there. We had our schools, our churches, our shops. But our parents went out to work in the other areas, but for us, there was no need to go. So there was no integration with Black or white people. And when I went to high school, that's when teachers start telling you about, informing you about what's going on. It's, it was very confusing because at home, my father would drum into us, you are just as good as everyone else. There's go out there and live your life. But of course, you step out there and society tells you another thing. They tell you you're not good enough. And I guess that's what this book is all about, is the actual day-to-day humiliations, injustices, and how we overcame that and how we pushed ahead, fortunately, because my siblings and I had parents who could see a future and could see a way out of there. Many where I grew up didn't. So I guess in that way, we were very blessed to have parents with that foresight, especially my mother, who's 94 now and still here, that she focused on educating us, because most of my friends in the community left school at the age of 13 to go and work in factories, and, they had no choices. But yeah, so that sort of set us, my siblings and I, up for a better future.
Yeah, wow. And I was really blown away by the strength of your mum.
Yeah.
And her foresight, yes, but also her courage.
Yeah.
Because I imagine that she would have been surrounded by friends, etc., or people around her saying, why are you still sending them to school? Why is you? But she really did understand, didn't she, that this would open your world up, really.
Yeah. And we're not talking about even going to university, because that was out of the question, but just getting a good, solid education that we could use to further ourselves, and so, she's a remarkable woman. She's still, at 94, still active and still very much in tune and, with what's going on in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. And she sounds like just an extraordinarily emotionally intelligent person, obviously.
Yes.
So growing up, you talk a lot about in your book about this feeling of not being white and not being black, and not really being fully accepted on either side of that fence, if you like.
Yeah.
What was that like, and how did you identify? I guess how did you identify when you were growing up?
I think growing up, I didn't know really what that all meant. I think when I got to after I finished college, I think when I started working and started mixing with other people, and I actually, in the book I write, my very first job, one of the white staff members was very impressed with my skills, and we worked late one evening, and he wanted to drive me home. He insisted on driving me home, and I think I developed this other person that I wanted to be, that I wanted to be seen as and accepted by people, because it's like we were brought up to aspire to be white, to be successful. Forget about who you are, forget about you as a person, but you've got to, your hair has to be straight, because curly hair just gives it away. So when he offered to drive me home to make sure that I get home safely and not take the train, I was petrified, mortified. I didn't want this man to see where I lived.
Right.
He would have known that I live in a colored area, but it's like I still wanted to hide that. I thought I would go down in his estimation as a person, and it was a nightmare driving home, and for him to drive me home. And I kept telling him to drop me at different places, so that he didn't have to actually come to the house and see where I lived. It was a terrifying experience for me. When he turned into our street, it's one of those things that's still in my memory, and I wish I can go back to this person today and I'll tell them how I felt. When I went back to work the Monday, there was no difference. There was nothing. But for me, it was very traumatic.
Yeah, wow. And as you say, if only you could go back now and speak to the person you were then too, to not just speak to him and say, this is how I feel, but to be able to say to yourself, it's okay, this is who I am. I am enough. And
But it's, when that's your daily existence, when that's your daily life, it's very difficult to shake that.
Yeah.
And we were not the job opportunities were very limited for us. I came to Australia to join the public service for the first time because we could not work in public service there. A lot of those, I guess those things are there that it still haunts me. It's still, I do think about a lot of those things. But I poured out a lot into the book, and not knowing that other people will actually read it. I think that shock only came afterwards, that, my private writings is now out there in the world and people are commenting and people are, it opened a lot of conversations with people. I was inundated with people's stories and wanting to share their stories and their own experiences. And, it gave a platform to people as well. But it also opened up another very ugly a space, which led to my second book. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. And so before we walk into that, I would really like the people listening along today to really understand that, because if people are listening and say they're in Australia, that our experience, our life experience is so radically different.
Yep.
So you write in the book that you grew up in an environment where obviously apartheid was happening. This is true segregation.
Yep.
Things are like buildings have signs on them for where you can and cannot go.
Yep.
What did it feel like? Like you and your husband Christopher came here in the early 80s, was it? And how did it feel when you got to Sydney, say, and were you looking for signs? Did you expect it to be similar?
Yes. I think for readers to understand as well, when we came to Australia, the first in 1982, I was pregnant, 4 months pregnant with my second child. And shortly after we arrived here, I struggled with homesickness.
Right.
And we stayed here for 2 months, and my anxiety was so bad. I felt unsafe. I suffered with health anxiety. We ended up going back to South Africa 2 months later.
Wow.
And the moment I knew what I was going back to, the life we wanted to get away from, but my frame of mind was so, I think I was very confused, and what now seemed like an opportunity for us to have a new life actually didn't seem in reality as great as I thought it would be.
Right.
And so we went back. The moment we arrived back there, got off the plane in South Africa, I knew we made a mistake. And we stayed for a couple of years, had the second child, but we knew we would come back, and we would come back at the right time. In 1982, Australia was also going through, tough economic times, high unemployment. It went from the Fraser government after we left to the Hawke government, and we believe things turned around, economically. I think had I not been pregnant, we probably would have stayed. It would have been easier, but it felt really hopeless. And I felt, despite the oppression, despite everything there, I felt safer there than here.
Yeah.
So we stayed, and, when we came back the second time was a lot easier. I could go and work. I could settle the children in school. Chris landed 3 jobs in one day, and things were just so different. So that first time, I didn't really experience the freedom that I thought we would see leaving South Africa. But coming back the second time, it's also a subject of another book. As an immigrant, coming onto the station, of course, people were unaware, but for me, there were benches with no seats. I was used to looking for my carriage. I was, and all those thoughts were going, and, still having homesickness, looking at other people and really seeing so many different cultures and languages. And I was exposed to so much more than I had been in South Africa. And these people on my commute to work over a long period unknowingly became my friends. And I learned so much from people on the train and conversations on the train. I learned so much about Australia. When I landed my first job here, was a short-term role in the public service. And after 3 weeks, I was then offered a job in the cabinet office. I could not believe myself, where I found myself. In South Africa, I could not walk on the side of Parliament House, even touch the fence of Parliament House. Yeah, I was, less than a year into life in Australia, walking in Parliament House. And for other people, it's just life. It's just the way it is. I was in awe of where I was. And, there was no one to share this with and to I felt like people would think I'm crazy, this person being in awe of these, little things, going to a toilet in there that everybody goes to, and not just for me, that said colored people. I'm sure you watched that movie, Hidden Figures, I think it's called.
Yes.
The lady NASA.
Yes, NASA.
That was when I look at that, it's actually traumatic for me, because that was my life. I could not use the same cups as other people. I worked in an office where I could not have morning tea with them. I sat at my desk while they had morning tea because they were all white.
Yeah.
They would go to a cafe to have lunch, and I would have to stay back, the only colored person there. So that movie actually causes me a lot of trauma. But if people have watched that, that's what happened to me. Not in NASA, but that kind of situation. So a lot of those things are ever present in you, and you try and shake it, you try and move on, but they're always reminders. And I had to go through this whole education of, I think, what racism is, and what discrimination is, that the people's arrogance and rudeness, I can recognize. But I grew up in a country where it was the law to discriminate against someone. Yeah, you can't stop bad behavior. You can't stop people, that you'll find that. But it's not the law. I have rights as a person, which was so different there.
That's very true. And I think your story is so powerful and so important. It's a constant reminder to us, though, that racism does exist, that racism still exists in the world, bigotry still exists. And we see it here in Australia. We see it against our own, our shocking history with our First Nations people, that segregation did exist here as well. And certainly there are levels of overt racism in certain states in this country that we're seeing it in the news play out now. Absolutely. And so for me, that was just such a powerful, because you've lived it, you've come here looking for this great new life, the freedom. And as you say, racism still exists here. It would be foolish, when people say, oh, we're not a racist country. And I think, I think it's foolish of people and dangerous of people to assume racism never exists. It does.
It does.
But as you say, the difference here is that you are legally, you have freedoms.
Yes.
That you hadn't experienced previously.
There are no separate doors for me to go through, or separate benches to sit on. Those are the things I think that people like us who lived under lawful segregation will notice, and I often tell people, I can identify rude and arrogant people, and they are racist, or they are, but that's how they are. That's, their own decision. But in the country, I'm free. I can live and buy a house wherever I want to, where I can afford it.
Yes, and you can shop wherever you want.
Yes,
and you
and
you had doors opened up to you in terms of a career, which, as you say, in South Africa would not have been possible. It's really interesting. I have a friend, Carly Finlay, and her mum Jeanette married. Her and her dad got married, and they had to leave South Africa because he was white and she is black, and so that's why they came to Australia to start a life and get married, because it would have been impossible to be married, where they were, and to live a life, and I think, so a lot of people who grow up in Australia, I think, are just so unaware, I think, sometimes that these things were happening. So this kind of leads us, though, to your second book. I mean, you're an avid writer and a beautiful writer, by the way.
Thank you.
So you when in writing the first book, as you sort of touched on this before, you hadn't expected other people to read it, and you hadn't expected any sort of commentary that might have happened, because this is your truth and these are your memories. Tell us a little bit about that and how you ended up writing your second book, which of course is called Behind My Smile.
So after, as I said, the first book, there was lots of accolades, there's lots of good launches, was amazing. It was an amazing journey. When I started, I think, going on social media, promoting the book and I had a page for the book where people shared their stories, and when I started getting the feedback from, I would presume would be white South Africans, it was very ugly, very personal. It was, name calling, telling me I'm made up of so many different parts, and like being a mongrel. And they say, what are you doing here in Australia? You wanted freedom, go back to South Africa. That's what you wanted. You were a kaffir lover, which is a very degrading thing, to call people. They wanted to know where I lived. They want to, there was accusations of me, because at the time there were lots of attacks on the farms in South Africa. People wanting to reclaim the land, and people were saying books like yours are the cause of these things, and people cannot get pictures of dead people being sent to me. I had a picture of a bird being thrown in a pot of boiling water, and they said that's me. That would come back to South Africa, and you'll see, what will happen to you. The publisher, the distributor of my book in South Africa sent me a message one night saying, we don't want you to respond to the kind of things people are saying. We will respond to it. We're just alerting you to what they were saying. And I, even like Chris, my husband, would say to me, don't look at these things. But I would find myself wanting to go and see what they wrote. And what people were saying. I was very, very hurt and concerned for my family as well. I initially kept it away from them because they would, curse my family, wish us dead, wish, terminal illnesses on us. They just horrible things. And as time went on, I think I became very fearful of these curses that they would manifest, and I would be harming my family, and I started my anxiety was really very high. I started thinking of my children. What have I done? What have I brought on them? And I started withdrawing and just not going anywhere, just staying at home. Initially, it was just being indoors, then only in my bedroom. I became really very, very fearful. And after, I think it's about 5 months, I had not left home. And my family were because I'm such an outgoing person, and they didn't know how to cope. They had no idea what to do, how to cope. And eventually, I think when I, during the night, because I had this thing about people might call it obsessive or OCD or what, I don't know. But I had this thing about that I helped me when my brother drowned. In our bathroom, we got new tiles. At the time, they put in tiles in our bathroom, 3 rows. And to calm myself, I would count those tiles. I knew exactly how many tiles there were, but I'd count that. And that became something that I did over time. So I'd go and sit in our bathroom and count the tiles. And everywhere I went, if I needed to calm myself, I would count tiles. I do write about that in my book, extensively in my book. And I realized then when I was, woke up one night and sat on the bathroom floor counting the tiles that I need to get help. I need to go. So my GP of 30 years had also just died before that. So I had to see someone else. And when I saw him, he gave me a list of prescriptions, tablets. He said, I think you need to take these. And I looked at the tablets and I went home and researched it, and I just couldn't. I thought, I cannot take these things. And I went back to him. I said, I need to, get some other help. I don't want to take medication. You don't even know me. So, then he gave me the list of, psychologists, and I researched them, and I selected the one person that I felt most drawn to. And I started therapy with him. It was the only place I went outside of my home. So Chris would drive me there, wait for me, bring me back. And this psychologist was also into other holistic treatments, therapies that I was really became interested in. And it gave me a focus. I think when in my isolation, I'd come home and research, and I was really interested in it. And over time, because I couldn't drive, I couldn't do anything. And after, I think I saw him after about 4 months, I decided I'm going to write about this journey. Because I had started driving, I went back to university to finish my postgrad studies, and I then wrote this book, Behind My Smile, because I also became very interested in the struggle with mental health and the services out there, and how people are falling through the cracks. That I was fortunate that we could afford the therapy. I did have those free sessions, but one of the things I think people that often I talk to people in my work now, that when you go and see a psychologist with that 10 free sessions, you must have that money in your bank account to pay them so that Medicare can pay you back. And people were saying to me, I don't even have that money to pay. I thought those sessions, unless you can get someone who can bulk bill, which is rare. So I became very interested in that, in the struggle that people have in getting help with their mental health, and also the type of therapy you want. You don't want to just go and take a tablet and be like a zombie. And, there are culturally appropriate therapies as well that people are interested in, but it's not available. It's not covered. It's not, you have to have money to do that. And so this book was more to, this psychologist told me the challenges he had as a psychologist in offering these services to people. And they're not covered. You have to do CBT for Medicare to pay it. So his therapies was a real eye opener to me and very healing, and something I became really passionate about is mental health and how these therapies work and what's available. Through my work with him, I did confront a lot of the past, a lot of the trauma from the past, and in dealing with actually letting my little brother go. It's something that I carried a lot of guilt about. And, as I grew older, it grew bigger in my mind. And I looked for, when people would say to me, but where were the parents? Where were your parents? He was 4 years old. And I started thinking, where was I? I was right there when he drowned. We were, we saw it all. And so I think I had to have that therapy that went way back to when I was 6 years old, and subsequently growing up under oppression, and how deeply embedded that was in my psyche, and so many things I had to let go, and I had to learn to love myself. That because it's almost like I had this other person that I was putting out there, always wanting to be seen as an equal. People saw me as an equal, but I didn't see that. And I struggled with that. I had this need that I had to be someone that people would accept, and I was never good enough to.
Yeah, wow. And the thing is, you said it just kept getting bigger in your head, but
yes.
This is the nature of generational trauma. It's the nature of trauma. It is the nature, of course, of grief. It is the nature of many things, and it is the nature of anxiety, right? To just keep growing, because if we cannot find a way to deal with it, I guess, to look at it head on and then find a way to heal from it. This is what happens. And and for you, there was so much in there. So first of all, I am so sorry about, your little brother. But it wasn't just the loss of your brother. It was, as you say, then looking back and going further past that, is this living a life in an oppressed society.
There was there's so many incidences that can be discussed, that can be, unpacked. And as a lot of non-South Africans have said to me, they heard about apartheid, they knew about it, they, had that. They just didn't understand the everyday injustices we lived through, we lived with, and we had no choice. That was our life. You would be thrown in jail if you oppose anything, or and I also have this real I don't know what to call it, like a love-hate relationship with white South Africans, and particularly older people, like people my age, or because I still believe that they had choices. They were the only ones who could vote. And that government was voted in landslide victories. And so they, I think what I want now from them is to admit that they are still living under that legacy, and to my disadvantage. So I think there's a lot of that in that for me, that I don't know if I'll ever heal from that.
Yeah. And thank you for being so honest about that, because I do think this is what a lot of people don't understand. And I think here in Australia, as we, mentioned our First Nations people, and people go, oh, why can't we just, it's the past? And you go, but it's not just the past. We're talking about generational trauma. And as you say, that colonists in this country and those of us that are the descendants of those colonists, our lives are a certain way at the expense of others, and at the expense of their land and their culture and their heritage. And so thank you for being so honest about that. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. There's no other way to be. I can't, I have to be honest. It shaped my life, and people like me, it shaped our lives. And we had no control over that. We had no say. We just had to, accept every day what was handed out to us.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, lots of the privileged people, I think they struggle still with that, the loss of that privilege, which, they were probably born into. And, so there's on both sides. They also didn't know another life. And I do have people who say to me, we didn't know what was, the extent of everything. I get very, very angry with that. Because you cannot not know that you were privileged. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And, we were so far removed in Australia, but we were certainly watching this play out on the news, Beryl. So, and I remember being like a young teenager even, and asking my parents about it and what does this mean and what's happening. And, my mum had a massive sense of social justice for all people, and she did until she passed away. And I think she was a disabled woman as well. So I think her sense of activism for anyone who was, where there was bigotry or oppression kicked in at a really young age for her. And so she was very big on explaining to us what was going on, but more importantly, what did that mean? What does that mean for human beings to live in that world? And I think, that's why I was saying, I think it's so important that you speak so openly and honestly about this, but it's such an important reminder that, things have moved, but things haven't moved fully, in South Africa, and, even for people in Australia, some people in Australia are still living under that. And, I agree.
There were a few signs for me as well. I ended up working with an academic at a university, and her and her sister were one of those people that we saw photographs of being dragged off the football fields, protesting, and I was actually with this person face to face. And, when I ended up working in Parliament, I was with Dr. Meredith Bergman, who was one of those people also arrested. And I was working. I needed that, working with these people who fought for us, for our freedom. So that was very powerful for me, that I ended up, and I felt very fortunate that I'd be one of those people. There's so many other South Africans here, but I had the opportunity to actually talk to these people and meet them and know who they are, and
Yeah, that's wonderful. It was such a journey for you, I guess. This started a full journey. You starting to see, a psychologist really was the beginning journey of you, as you said, to heal.
It was, and and I think I found the right person in for my healing. I think had it been someone else, it may not have worked as well for me, because it wasn't the traditional psychology. He was open to other therapies, and so was I. And I think it would not have been as healing for me. It still took a lot of work on my end. It's, you go for that hour to see someone, and then you leave there, and what then? Which is, I think I worked very hard. I was very determined to get back to where I was. So I think I just met the right person to help.
Yeah. And I think it's, one of the things that I have learned over the years, I'm very, very big on people seeking help when they need it. And I had childhood traumas. I think, as you say, it's fine, A, finding the right person, but B, especially as women, really having to, it's not fair, but we do have to advocate for ourselves.
Yeah. As
you said, going to a doctor who didn't know you and said, here, just take some tablets.
Yeah.
And you saying, well, that's kind of a Band-Aid for what's happening. I'm a big believer that if you go and see someone and you don't feel aligned with that counsellor or psychotherapist or psychologist or whomever it may be, to seek out someone else.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely seek out someone else. And the other thing I would say too is that when people go and talk to their GP, if they genuinely don't have the money in their bank account to get these free sessions, they need to be talking about their GPs.
Yeah.
Be honest, because, they will be able to help find areas and places that can help and support. Because that's the other thing no one tells you either.
Yeah. I know it's I know for a lot of people, and of course there's also the stigma attached to getting help, which is not as not the way it was maybe 30 years ago. People are more open to talking about it, but it's still seen, particularly in some cultural groups, it's very it's frowned upon to go and get help. People, think it's wrong to go and talk to another person. I do get that a lot in my work. So, with people, Well, I think, behind my smile, you've bravely put everything out there, like you didn't hold back, and I think it's that's powerful for other people then to read, other people who have gone through trauma, and then you do talk about having panic attacks and debilitating anxiety, and but in you talking about it, and this is the thing, I'm a firm believer in the power of stories, because your story and in telling that gives someone else permission to actually look at themselves and look at their healing and look at their trauma, and it might encourage people to go then and go, well, maybe I can do that too. And I think as well in the workplace that people have that freedom of saying, I am not having a good day. Today I feel anxious, and and not being afraid of losing your job or people thinking you're crazy, or people, and really comes from the top down, that people are allowed to have, of course, within reason, people are allowed to be safe and say, today I feel very anxious, and can openly say that. Yeah.
And have some flexibility around that in the workplace as well, I think is really important as well. So you've now written. Because you don't sit on your hands, Beryl. There's no time off for you, is there? You've now written a brand new book, and this one's called Living with Purpose, Inspired Living. Tell me about that and how it came about, because as soon as I mention it, you just break into smiles.
That book is a happy book for me. It's somewhere where I could express a lot of who I want to be and how I see myself now. And I cover a few different areas in there, happiness, inclusion, joy, peace, self-love, which is so important, and that I've had to learn. And so a lot of during my therapy, in the time spent on my own, I would often go for walks, and I would think about all these things, think about things to say to myself, words of encouragement, like affirmations. And this was, one of the things the therapist told me. And so I'd create these things as I walk and in nature, and I loved going to the beach and walking there. Once I could leave my home and felt free and safe, I then started writing down these words that I found very encouraging. Not thinking I'm going to write another book. And so in Living with Purpose, I tie these words of encouragement to little stories on what I have experienced. And hopefully that will give people, some encouragement or self-support. I envisage that you can open the book on any page and find some inspiration. That's how I'd like to see the book being used. So yeah, that's a really happy book for me. It's something where I could pour out these words of inspiration and words that helped me along my way, along my journey to calming my mind. I think I will always suffer with anxiety, but I now have tools that I can use to pull myself back. And even though it's been a long journey with healing, I now know what I can do. Before I didn't. I was just walking around in the dark, counting tiles and, doing those things. There are other things I can do now. Yeah. So I think this book, I'd love to see it on coffee tables, on people's bedsides, on, just as a book of inspiration.
Yeah, beautiful. And does it feel like almost like, as you say, and I love that the honesty is brilliant, that, so I had a friend recently say to me, how did you forgive? How did you heal? How did you do all these things? And I said to her, I don't know, that it's never not there. Yeah. It's just that you learn better tools to deal with it.
Yes,
right?
That's exactly, and I think that is what we have to look for, is the tools, and not I need to forgive. I need to, it's learning that tools for yourself and how to manage it.
Yeah. Yes. And that can be different for everyone, obviously. Yeah. And our traumas are all different, and where we, came from and whatever is all different. So I do think that. But I think what I love about your journey and your story and your message when you talk is that it is a continuous journey as well, right? So this is not, we don't just one day go, oh, I'm healed now.
Yeah.
Oh, it's all good. Yeah. It doesn't work like that. And as you say, that you will probably always have anxiety, but you now know how to actually deal with that and bring yourself back to a nice place, to a happy place, to a safe place.
That's true. It's a work in progress. It'll always be, but I feel like I'm on the other side of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's incredible. And it shows in this beautiful smile that you have. And when you talk about this book, I can tell that it really has been more of a labor of love.
It has. Again, scribbles and things that I actually managed to pull together. And I have to, the person who helped me actually to do the layout, she was amazing. And, without her, I couldn't have, put it out like that. I'm very proud of it. Yeah.
Well, congratulations on the new book. I think it's fantastic. Yeah. You are, a beautiful example of someone who has gone through so much but has chosen to share that in order to help others. And I think that's exactly what, especially, your memoir, but Behind My Smile, I really do believe that this will help so many people.
I hope so. I hope that book was released during COVID, so it didn't really get out there as as a darker shade of pale deep. So I feel that it was a bit lost in that time. So I'm hoping that, more people will read that book as well.
Yeah, great. And I will definitely be putting, for all of our listeners, I'll be putting all of the links to where they can find your books and read your books, and where they can find you and follow you, Beryl, on your socials as well.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful.
Yeah, I am working, sort of at first draft stage of my next book, which I'm very excited about.
This is a nice confession in the confessional.
Yeah, it's more. I think it'll tell more of, it's very honest and open book of. I think new immigrants or people coming to this country will find might be useful. It's Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's amazing. And also for those of us who are not immigrants, also to maybe read it and actually get a bit more insight.
Yeah.
Which is important as well. So, Oh my God, well, I'm super excited to read your next work. As I said, you are not a woman who knows how to just do nothing.
Yeah, no. I think I thrive on being busy and being creative and being, putting my stories out there. I dreamed for years, for a long time about this, and now I can do it. And now I feel like I'm unstoppable. There's nothing to stop me from doing it as before.
Oh, I just love this about you, and I agree. And I think this is one of the big things about our platform is really saying to other women and non-binary people that it's not about your age, is it?
Yeah,
it's really
not.
About no.
I tell everyone, my young colleagues think I'm their age. They forget how old I am.
I can see that though.
They I have to remind them sometimes. I come from way back.
But that's your beautiful, youthful energy, I think.
I did have someone say to me once, you act like a young person, and I was quite offended at that, and I thought I have never been this age. How am I supposed to act?
That's funny. Well, I'm very, very excited about the next book. Beryl, thank you so much for giving up your Saturday afternoon to chat with me here today. And I'm incredibly honoured. I'm in awe of the amount that you have written and the extraordinary stories that you've been able to tell. And for someone to write a memoir, I've tried starting mine a number of times and it's just not there yet. And I just think I'm in awe of anyone who can write a memoir and really put their truth and their history and their story down. And so congratulations.
Thank you.
On your 3 amazing books.
Thank you. It's all about honesty. I think when you're honest, people can feel that. And, when you're writing something, you have to be honest and not try and hide some of the things that, you think, I don't want to write about that.
Yeah. And I think that, as you said, you wrote it thinking, oh, no one's going to read it. I think this is, and I've heard this advice so many times, if you're going to write a memoir, write it like no one's going to read it.
That paid off for me. I think, that I thought somewhere down the track that one of my family will read it and they'll look at this crazy ancestor that lived and wrote this book. So,
Oh, look. It's been an absolute delight to meet you and chat with you. And thank you for joining me from Sydney. I really appreciate it.
No, thanks. I'll definitely be posting your links. I've gone through some of your podcasts. I love it. I found something now. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And I mean, yes, I've, how lucky am I that this is, I just get to meet all, yourself and all these amazing women. I mean, it really is my happy place.
So many stories. Yeah.
So many stories. And this is the thing. I think when I started this podcast, one of the taglines originally was every woman has a story.
Yes.
And but we all do. We all do. And, the one thing about it now that it's evolved into is, for me, I call it hard-won wisdom, and it's a platform for women to share theirs, and you have definitely shared your hard-won wisdom, so thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts as well.
Thank you so much, Beryl.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening along to the Good Girl Confessional Podcast. I'm really thrilled and excited that the Good Girl Confessional Podcast is part of the WB40 Women Beyond 40 platform, a platform we created for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond to share their hard-won wisdom and to learn more information about the things that matter to us as women, midlife and beyond. Now, wherever you're listening to this podcast, I would be hugely grateful if you can follow, like and subscribe, because it helps the algorithm to actually reach more like-minded women, and they will realise that they're not alone in their journey, that's for sure. You might also like to know that we're over on YouTube. Join us there, The Good Girl Confessional. We're also on Instagram and Facebook as both The Good Girl Confessional and Women Beyond 40, and we're over on TikTok under Women Beyond 40. I would also like to thank the editor and producer of the podcast, Michael Smedley. As always, what a brilliant person, and thank you so much for listening along. I love you. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you soon.